Right.
Let me shift gears one moment and talk more about just explicitly about race and class. I was I went through this fast food place today. I had no business going, and I
Okay.
ordered some food from an older African American woman, and I got a conversation going with her. She's from Alabama. Her name is Mabel. Nobody knows her, so I'll say her name, Mabel. Sweetheart, loved her to death, and I stayed in that line long enough to just observe her and see how old she was and how hard she was hustling
Right.
to keep up with that pace. And actually, I've talked with her before, and she is a Hillary Clinton supporter. And
Uh-huh.
she's a proud Hillary Clinton supporter. And I get it. You know, she can support whoever she wants. But I couldn't help but see the irony of her trying to survive in this world that's demanding her to work in her twilight years,
Right.
and in an environment that's not going to pay her enough to live, still being proud to align with someone who, at a minimum, is not going to do anything to affect that reality. If she doesn't make it worse, like Republicans may, Clinton is not going to do anything to fix that. And here we are, completely incapable of having a conversation with about a class construct, because race is blocking us from having that conversation. And I just couldn't help but to see how, not just an irony, but the sad irony of how many African Americans and Americans in general, particularly older Americans, who are trapped in this economic paradigm. And we can't even have a substantive conversation about how to fix that. How do we begin that conversation, and how do we help people who are being hurt by this system to realize that, we've been hoodwinked for a very long
Right.
time?
Well, I mean, that's another good one. I mean, yeah, look, you're absolutely right, man, and I share your poignance. I mean, because it's only going to get worse, right? I mean, that's the thing about it, right?
Yeah.
At some point, unless we can make an effective counterweight, there is going to be the grand bargain on Social Security, and I've been saying lately too. I mean, like the Republicans just cut
Yeah.
public services and say, I'm just cutting it, right? Because I don't care about you, and demonize people who are victimized by it.
Hmm.
But the Democratic way of doing it is by a sleight of hand, right? The claim, and like as a New Orleanian man, this just brings Katrina to my mind, but with this notion that you can do more with less,
Yeah.
right? And we're smart, so we're going to cut the budget, but it's really only fat, and we can deliver the services just as well, blah 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 blah. Well,
Mm.
as Buckminster Fuller said, like in the '70s, you don't do more with less. You do more with more. You do less with less. That's why they call more, and they call less less.
Yeah.
And what doing more with less means is Katrina. What
Mm.
doing more with a less means is Flint. What it means is like the rotting infrastructure of the DC Metro. It's like it's like what's felt almost like a water main break somewhere every week in the city of Philadelphia for the last year and a half,
Yeah.
uh, because it's a flim flam, right? I mean, that said, look, I mean, I don't think that people are duped. I think one of the problems is, and like this gets to the core question of how to try to go about changing this.
Hmm.
One of the problems with tying politics to the election cycle is you've got to operate within the dominant common sense, right? Because the time frame, like for getting stuff done, is too short, and the kind of contact that you have to have with people to try to build electoral support is too thin. Okay, what I thought so. I mean, that's one reason that I never thought that the Sanders campaign would be, the magic intervention that sort of sparks the mass movement,
Hmm.
right? But what it can be, and still can be, and there's a good chance for this, is that it can be the occasion for galvanizing. Yeah, like it's going to spawn a lot of electoral activity, and some of it's going to be more reasonable than others of it. Some of it's going to be more successful than other initiatives. But the big promise of this thing, from my perspective, is that it can help to bring together people who are committed to make to an ideal of more fundamental and broad, or well, I don't want to say fundamental because that sounds like a cliche, but of concrete social transformation, right? Kind of reasserting the centrality of public goods and public services,
Yeah.
right? Reasserting the importance of employment over combating inflation, turning around, right, the sharply skewed mechanisms that support steadily intensifying upward redistribution.
Mm-hmm.
None of that stuff. So that means specifically stuff like free public higher education. I think free public transportation is also a not insane goal, but a serious national health care system. We've got the third best third best healthcare system between here and the equator, right? And the most expensive in the world at the same time. Little Cuba, which is where a lot of my family is a much better than we are, and it's insane. But we don't get there overnight, and we don't get there through chatting on MSNBC. How we get there is through building relationships of standing with people in union locals, neighborhoods, churches, softball leagues, other community configurations and of interest groups, by trying to find ways to inject local concerns and struggles with this perspective that sees them as elements, moments, pieces of a bigger project, right? And not just what I hate to use this because it's like foundation speak, but not just interest groups in the various issue silos, right? Mm-hmm. But that takes time to develop the kind of relationships among activists even that are necessary. A good friend of mine has been linked to the Workers' Party in Brazil since its beginning, and he's pointed out that they were in existence like for 6 years before they ran a serious election campaign, right? But there's this tendency, like in the U.S. I mean, you may know I was involved with the effort to try to build an independent labor party in the U.S. from beginning to the end. And one of the things we constantly came up against was that people wanted to run candidates before we had any kind of base, right? They wanted to get coverage like on CNN or whatever, like they'd ever give an initiative. I mean, like that a fair hearing. So I mean, there's a tendency, and I understand the tendency because things are bad. And they're steadily getting worse. And there's this sense of urgency, right, that we've got to do something. Well, right. But we didn't get into this situation overnight. Like, we're not going to get out of it overnight. And, yeah, there's a lot of what has to happen is really going to be, for the foreseeable future, struggles to try to stop the bleeding, right?
Yeah.
And fend off, like, the worst possible kinds of initiatives. But those don't convert automatically into getting on the offensive. So a key thing for us, for our side, I think, is to try to figure out how to get on the political offensive, right? I mean, yeah. I often say, like in the stump, that our interests got more from Richard Nixon than we've gotten from any of the three Democratic presidents since then, or will from the fourth. And it's not because Nixon liked us anymore or believed in the things that we believed in. The difference was that the social movements that our interests were born by, right, were stronger and had more political capacity and couldn't be ignored. But I mean, we got the EPA from Nixon, we got OSHA from Nixon, we got affirmative action from Nixon, we got wage and price controls from Nixon. And every Democratic president since then, starting with my one-time governor, Jimmy Carter, has moved farther and farther in the direction that has since come to be called neoliberalism.